So we have the difficult slot after lunch when you've all had too many sandwiches and biscuits. So we're going to up the energy a bit, aren't we, ladies? That's right. Yeah, perfect. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. And this session is about design for all, creating inclusive public spaces. So we all know as built environment professionals that our streets and spaces are more than just routes from A to B. They're where our daily life plays out. And I think we've heard lots about that this morning, which is brilliant. They shape our experiences, our connections, and our sense of belonging. And I think it was great. We heard the word belonging and feeling quite a few times this morning, which I think is quite unusual for this type of conference. So we want to look at streets and spaces for all from lots of different perspectives. And we have these three wonderful ladies on the stage with me. Lucy is going to set the scene for us, talking about how we ensure human connection is embedded in place. Hopefully. She might go rogue, who knows. Marta then will look at how cities have changed over time and how we shape them. And then Holly is going to talk about what falls beneath the cracks and design with children in mind. So again, another focus on young people, which was accidental, wasn't it? So we seem to have a theme of young people, which is brilliant. And then I'm just going to sum up on how we might be able to start to create change. So we're going to do a little bit of a warm-up just to make sure everyone's awake. And then each speaker will share their perspective in a kind of Petra Kucha style. So we'll try and do quick presentations. And then after that, we'll have a series of Slido questions if the technology works. Hopefully it will. And we can get some conversation going. So we want this to be a bit more kind of collaborative and get the conversation going between the audience and the speakers as well. So hopefully we can have a Slido poll. So just make sure you've got some Wi-Fi. And hopefully we have a first Slido question. Oh, I have to do it, don't I? Perfect. What do you think are biggest challenges in our built environment that means it's not accessible to and equitable for everyone? So answers on a postcard and on the screen would be awesome. Robert, were you going to do a dance routine for us in between whilst we wait? Oh.
You can do pen and plate. That sounds like a bribe.
Money. Sorry. And the password is, and if you haven't scanned the Slido to log in, it's on the back of your pass. So we've got cars, money I saw earlier, car dependency, comfy seating, toilets, wrong people in the room, politics, uneven pavements, road infrastructure. These are going really quick. Ease of maintenance, fear of crime, lighting, money again, affordable affordable housing, lack of play, movement, access to reliable public transport, competition for space, car-dominated, distance, communication, privatisation, disability inclusion, toilets again, collaboration, cars, ugliness, that's a good one, risk aversion, politicians, parking, cars. Okay, I think we kind of get the feel. Panellists, any reflections on any of that? More cars, quality? Okay. Lots of great ones there. Traffic, distance and quality, community facilities. It'd be really interesting to see if these tally with urban flourishing, wherever Hugo and Max are. I can't see you from here. Yeah, really interesting. I think vehicles and car domination was one of the themes that came up on urban flourishing as well. I can't actually see you. Where are you, Hugo and Max? Oh, you're there. Cool. So a little bit more information there for your survey. Right. So I think we should hear from the panellists. Again, not enough public toilets, priority for cars, lack of diversity. Lack of diversity, that's a good place for us to stop, I think. So a little introduction to our panellists. We have Lucy, who's going to talk first. She's an associate urban designer at UMC Architects, a qualified architect and theatre designer. Her career has been driven by a fascination with the human condition, our connection to history and land, and how cultural, economic, and environmental and spiritual forces shape our lives across generations. Lucy's on the Urban Design Group Executive Committee, and she has a wide network of collaborators across architecture, theatre, and urbanism. So, Lucy, you want to kick us off with Neuro, Evolution, and Cities. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Who wrote that about me? I know. So, no, thank you everyone for being here, for having me. I'm going to kick off this with a word that's a kind of a non-word, and it's kind of a bit of a buzz just to kind of create a little bit of thought. I wasn't really sure what to call this. I basically, Hannah said to me, she said, what's your thoughts on sort of neurodiversity, et cetera, et cetera? And I said, as somebody who has all of the sparkle dust sprinkled all over me, I have probably quite a few thoughts. But in wanting to get a better perspective, I thought, right, why don't I just put into chat GPT 1,000 words on neurodiversity in cities. And I was kind of disappointed with what came back, because whilst we love ChatGPT, because it's a very useful tool, it came back with notions, these 4 sort of key points on how to help people with neurodiversity in cities. And one of them was about issues with light. And I wanted to take this idea and think, do you know what, like the marginalization of people within cities is not something to solve through marginal tasks. So it's not about creating darker spaces where the light doesn't get to you or whatever because you need that. It's actually, let's think more about how cities were like created historically. So research has shown that even, you know, light at night like this, the artificial, the blue light, all of that stuff is really damaging to us. As my good friend Emma Tompkins had spoken about a couple of weeks ago, and the impacts of that, but also to the flora and fauna, so it confuses birds and animals, and the trees suffer. So there's something to kind of think about here. The second point was about noise levels, and the thing that interests me about this, you're going to have to like forgive I didn't create these images, of course, but you have to, you know, have to forgive the kind of the cartoonish element to them. Because at 85 decibels, it's considered harmful to us. And when I look to the sort of left, cities, when they were noisy, you know, historically, that's kind of what you would kind of see for the most part. And then to the right is what we have created over the last sort of 200 years and going forward. So our cities are getting noisier. They are getting more unhealthy. And it brings about a thought of, well, you know, there's something going on here where it's not just people with neurodiversity are struggling with their sensory issues. It's just that essentially the bottom line is it's becoming more difficult to live in cities. So if it affects neurodiverse people, surely it's affecting all of the population. And is it any surprise that there are more people on medication, suffering with mental health issues, physical health issues, so on and so forth? It doesn't want to change. There we go, sorry, everybody. And the next one was, put up green walls to help with absorbing sound and whatever. Oh, you know, fads, we love a fad, don't we? Solar panels, green walls, you know, all this stuff is fine, but it doesn't solve things. It doesn't fundamentally underpin us as a species and how we live as a collective. And the last point was about overstimulation from lots of advertisements and light and lots of billboards and all that kind of thing. They shouldn't be where there are lots of people. But this is exactly where there are lots of people. You know, it's the commerciality of that is akin to put that stuff where people need to be, but in research, it's showing that it's fundamentally harmful to us. So why am I even talking about this? Why am I talking about neurodiversity? It's a notion, we all have our different beliefs about it. Some people think we all just live on a spectrum, we're all a bit this, we're all a bit that, and others fully believe in the diagnosis. And specifically about autism and ADHD, if we think back to our predecessors, and before the first agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, we lived as a hunter-gatherer species in small enclaves, and this picture is showing the notion of a person with potentially with ADHD in their skill sets, whilst today we talk about restlessness, not being able to sit still, difficulty to focus, etc., etc. Those skills are absolutely fantastic for hunter-gathering, you know, going out on the hunt for hours on end, having a key goal, staying up late. Those are all actually essential to our success. Similarly, people with autism, again, it's a label, but you know, here we are labelled or have the definitive identities of being very detail focused, having fantastic memory for different subjects, and the suspicion is this sort of drawing would have been done by somebody with autism who had studied the animals around them, so and created a cave drawing to reflect this and to pass down knowledge. Today, I think this is a Stephen Wiltshire drawing. And does anyone know who Stephen Wiltshire is and what he does? Yeah, the guy that's put up in a helicopter and goes up for 20 minutes and then draws cities by memory, and down to the last window it is accurate. You know, he's what you call a savant. And today, this is the guy that would have been doing this. He would take that information, he'd be able to replicate it and give you all sorts of information because he's got that kind of capability. Today, it's an interest, but how is it used? And I think, you know, when we talk about how we were as species, you know, we settled down for good reasons, you know, to trade better, to be more efficient with our farming, our food creation, and we could specialize, and, you know, that's how we end up with artists and engineers and all these wonderful things that people are today in the societies that we have created. But there's been a little bit of a cost, and with the Industrial Revolution, there was a shift towards marginalise people into specific tasks. We all work 9 to 5 or similar, or a lot of us do, and it's showing up in our nervous systems that it's not necessarily right for us. I know I like to stay up late, but I've got to get up early, and anyone who knows me knows it's a bit of a task to get me up in the morning. But this is what the requirement was, and it's kind of ended up with Mr. Incredible, who I love. I don't know if anyone else loves The Incredibles. I absolutely love The Incredibles, because for me it's an absolute mirror, holding up a mirror to us as a society where, you know, of course he's the proverbial superhero, and I'm not calling neurodiverse people superheroes and everybody else isn't, but it's the notion that there's a lot of round pegs being forced into square holes, and I would like to see a little bit more self-reflection as a society in how we create our cities at a fundamental level. Because, of course, we should all be Mr. Incredible and his family and doing what really is, fundamentally right for each of us. So thank you for that, and have a great day.
Thank you, Mrs. Incredible. So next we have Marta Reina. Marta is a senior associate at Savills Urban Design Studio with over 20 years experience in urban design and architecture across the UK and internationally. She specialises in revitalising urban areas and leading regeneration programmes for the public sector. And her PhD research explored how European public spaces are being transformed today. Over to you, Marta.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, everyone, for having me here. I'm an urban designer with a background in architecture, but my heart has been on the public realm forever, street life. For the past 20 years, I've been studying, designing it, analyzing it, because I really feel that it's the game board for the community life. This is the place where we really meet. Today I want to take you on a journey, a quick one, through the transformation of the public space in Europe. Together we'll look at the challenges of each moment and how governments, designers and community try to respond. It's good to remember that after the Second World War in Europe, the challenge was the rebuilding. Priority was infrastructure and housing. Public space, when it appeared, was mostly functional, efficient, and secondary, always secondary. It was in the 60s and 70s when the car became the king. Streets were redesigned, but for traffic. The challenge of that time was mobility, so pedestrians lost their space forever. It was in the 80s where things began to shift. Population stopped growing. So cities no longer needed to expand, and the focus turned into what is existing already. First projects were new plazas, square, urban parks, but they were treated as isolated architectural elements, not as separated or segregated from the context, although they were seen as first step toward regeneration. It's in the 90s, the scale grew bigger. It's good to remember that time where in the 90s it was a moment of economic expansion and public investment. The creation of the European Union, it was based in the expansion and the quality of their cities, especially in the public space. New train stations were built in the city center, highways were redesigned, and connections across cities were reimagined. At the same time, people was demanding more. And they wanted public spaces, not just for greenery or for iconic elements, but for culture, sport, gathering. New uses meant new designs, dynamic, continuous spaces, and flexible layouts to accommodate all these new uses. At the same time, cities even began to re-engage with their former industrial sites, engage with the rivers, and erase former barriers. Integration was the key at that moment. Streets were refurbished, and the designers start thinking on the street sections, from facade to facade. Big infrastructure projects also took a new role, integrating spaces that had long divided communities. Another interesting vision from the 90s is this idea of the city, of the public realm as a system, where the component of this system were the streets, squares, and parks. They all had to be connected, and they all had to be treated with the same level of quality, especially in cities as Barcelona. This is something that you can still see in Barcelona, how well it works. Others with the same vision, but not so ambitious. Some pedestrian networks began to expand inside cities, making walking a more natural and continuous experience, and cyclone networks reach farther, connecting cities with the natural context. Then in 2000s, not the young one, but all the others, we remember the economic crisis, 2008, where suddenly the investment in public realm was zero. But with this little investment, communities and activists took the lead. One example is the tactical urbanism with small budgets, low budget, citizen-driven actions. And they start challenging the past and the big strategies, for example, and they ask new questions. So, for example, who owns the city, who decides the priorities, and why do cars still dominate? Also, feminist perspective came forward, pointed out how cities often ignore women's needs, and calling for design that is truly inclusive. Community-driven, community-led projects like community gardens start adding layers of complexity and questions about the present and the future. look at food security, local food system, resilient projects. All these questions were very, very important during pandemic, for example. No? And some cities have taken, have picked many of these ideas and leading, taking the lead at the moment. Paris, Barcelona, Copenhagen, the 15-minute cities that it was mentioned before, have sparked, became mainstream in a way. Not sure, but yeah, it's having a lot of influence. But looking ahead, the question is, what is, if we are preparing, if we are prepared and if we are preparing our places for climate emergency, no longer distant, but we can feel the effect, especially in the summer. Perhaps we need to start creating climate refuge in every neighborhood, shaded areas, spaces for cooling and protection for everyone, not only in private places. Are we preparing for our city for demographic change? With global population over 80 will triple by 2050. Can we imagine simple things like toilets in every bus stop or benches in our guidelines, benches every 100 meters, for example? And also, are we preparing for new technologies? Are we using it? I mean, will new technologies disrupt the public life, or we can use it to improve the way we manage the public realm, the way we manage parking, for example, and resources. So today, our challenge is to balance inclusivity, sustainability, and resilience without leaving anyone behind. We think public space is never static, it's always evolving, always reflecting the needs and values of their people. So we need to decide who we are and what are the values of our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta. That's great. And Holly, last but not least. Holly Weir is a strategic urban and transport planner policy leader with over 15 years' experience in shaping healthy, inclusive and people-centred places. Her work has a particular focus on child-friendly cities and neighbourhoods, drawing on her background in public sector leadership, academic research and policy development. Holly has a proven track record of influencing planning and transport systems to enable healthier, more active lives, and is passionate about driving systematic change through strong cross-sector collaboration. Over to you.
Hey everyone. So I've titled my presentation "Falling Through the Cracks." I kind of want to highlight a little bit what Chris King also mentioned this morning about how we work together and the gap that I've found exists between planning and highway systems in particular. My background's predominantly in urban planning, but I'm currently working on the active travel team at Suffolk County Council here in Ipswich. So I feel like I've seen the challenges from both sides and sort of well placed to talk about that. It's also something that I think impacts on those most vulnerable groups, such as children, the most. And that's important to me because I've done a PhD on child-friendly neighbourhoods and really explored in depth how children use their neighbourhoods to get around. So I'll talk a little bit about my research on that in my talk today. So why is it important? I'm just going to whiz through some of these. Basically, it's good for children. It supports their mental and physical well-being. There's lots of evidence to show that. I'm not going to dwell on that now, but there's tons of academic research to tell us that it's really good for children. And what's unique about children? A few things here to think about. So children are still developing their independence. They don't drive a car. They tend to walk a bit slower or move a bit slower. They've got slower reaction times. They're usually a bit smaller than adults, and they need to play. But at the same time, I don't want to talk too much about play today because I think often when we think about planning for children, we look at playgrounds. But actually, playgrounds don't tend to be the answer. They're one thing that children need, but when we're looking at how we design our places, they're not the thing I think we should be focusing on. I also don't want us to focus on the good old days. And sorry for the quality of some of the images, these are sometimes screen grabs. But this map here is one that if you've ever been to a conference on child-friendly cities, you'll have seen. It was famously printed in the Daily Mail. It shows one family's history of how they've moved around over the generations. On the bottom left, you've got George, the great-grandfather, who in 1919 went fishing and travelled 6 miles to go there on his own at the age of 8. I don't think, as much as I'm in this work, this is what I do, I didn't aspire for my 8-year-old to go 6 miles on his own. I think now we're in a different world. I think we need to plan for freedoms for children. We want them to have freedom to choose and do what they want. But I think maybe it wasn't perfect in 1919 either. So just to have that in mind. Also, I just want to sort of reiterate that we want children to have freedom, we want them to be safe. That doesn't mean avoiding roads. It doesn't mean putting helmets on them, putting sort of body armour on them and keeping them safe away from risk. It means making places safe. What we're doing at the moment is creating bigger cars like SUVs, which make you safer if you're in them. But there's lots of evidence just being put out to show the risk is much worse if you're not in them, and that's particularly the case for children. But yeah, so is it all bad? I mean, here's some stats. Just kind of giving you a rough idea of what's happened over the last sort of couple of decades. So children are increasingly travelling to school by car, as these stats show. But obviously, this also shows that over half of children in 2020 were travelling by other means. Some of those children were my own. So this GPS track here is one that I took, I think when one of my boys was about 5 or 6. It's when I was living in Hackney in East London before I moved to Suffolk. And there were some features of the neighbourhood that allowed me to let him run around on his own, just round the block. And probably what inspired my research, to be honest. So it's a high-density neighbourhood in Hackney in East London. If you look on the left there, the primary school was quite close by. It was a cul-de-sac, not often that popular these days, but worked really well for children playing, which meant it was low traffic. Interestingly, I had a shared garden with my next-door neighbour, which worked really well because my kids and their kids could play together in a safe space. And notably, there was no playgrounds. I mean, they were further away, but in that particular little residential area, there wasn't. So now I'm just going to draw on some of the key themes of what came out of my research. I was quite excited this morning when Nikki mentioned third places, because that's one of the key things that I drew out in the research I did in my PhD. I worked with a small group of children from 3 schools in Hackney. We did mainly qualitative sort of research, so one of the key things I did was like neighbourhood walkarounds, which I know someone else mentioned this morning too. But yeah, the third places theme came out really strongly. And I think what's interesting as well is I feel like I stole this from research that had already been done on older people. We haven't talked much about older people today, but often their needs really overlap, I think, with what children need too. So I'm just going to quickly run through a little bit of the detail. So we've got threshold spaces. These are the space outside your front door. These images are just images that I took from the children that I worked with in my research, so clearly not best practice as such, but just to give a sense of the sort of places that they might see as these threshold spaces. And these are really important as a first step towards wider neighbourhood mobility for children. It helps them build confidence in getting around their neighbourhood, helps to start to build a sense of community in their neighbourhood. And I think they're probably one of the spaces that's often the most overlooked in terms of when we're thinking about design. Sometimes it can be the pavement, which then goes across to highways rather than planning. And then you get like this one in the top right, which is just a rubbish swing, which again, people think they're planning for children, but actually that particular space, the girl there, well, she was 10 at the time, she couldn't even fit in the swing, so she wasn't going to use that space. But just to highlight that we really need to think about these spaces. They're vital for people to then access the rest of their community. Then we've got the transitory spaces. So these are what I'd call the places between places, basically the roads and the streets. In Hackney in particular, it was generally easier to get around on foot than in a car, and therefore walking was kind of normative. Everyone did it. There was cut-throughs like you can see on those 2 top images, which meant that it did just feel really easy to walk. The key thing I found that children needed in these spaces was, first of all, they need to be able to get out their front door safely, and then they needed somewhere to go close by, which we'll come on to in a moment. And then they just needed like a footway, a pavement, and a crossing, and sort of that isn't always the case. They're not always there, and if you've got even one road with no safe crossing point, that really stopped them going at all. And then, of course, they need somewhere to go, which is what's called destination spaces. So again, we're not talking about like the big destinations necessarily. These are like smaller scale neighbourhood destinations. So this is where you might have a playground or a cage or a ballpark or something. You know, it's great if the school can be in close proximity. But perhaps the key thing, though, that helped children in certainly developing their confidence, navigating their neighbourhoods and starting their journey to independence was the corner shop. So like the image in the top right, you know, in London, everyone really has a corner shop somewhere nearby, and that was like a great thing. They could go and get their pint of oat milk or whatever and go home. And yeah, that's called sort of starting their journey into their neighbourhood and their community. So just to summarise, really, a lot of the needs of children and these third spaces are a good example, I think, of the interaction between, or the lack of it, between highways and planning that often does end up as a gap in the process. You know, they're not within the red line of a development necessarily, but in highways terms, they're kind of not being considered either. So we've got these sort of preconceived ideas, I guess, that planners are only thinking about inside that red line of a development. And highways engineers are often only thinking about like visibility displays, parking requirements, peak hour traffic congestion. I mean, we've been talking in our team at Suffolk County Council about how when we're working on active travel, how can we make it more about placemaking and those sort of needs, and making it more about places rather than movement and roads. We're always up against the system, it's just really hard, and I think the preconceived ideas about what we do make it even harder. So I guess really, just to sum up, this is a call for us all to try to work better together, as Chris said this morning too, recognising that we all have challenges, but if we work better together to create places, we'll make places better for children and better for everyone, basically. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Holly. That's great. We should have one more. Perfect. So just to finish up on that, I just want to tell you about a little project that we've been doing to raise awareness for accessibility with a number of other businesses. So it's a collaboration with the businesses there at the bottom. We've got Mend, Master Space Soul, UC Media and Turley. And I think this morning really provided a different take on conference discussion. I think we've moved away from the discussion of as kind of built environment professionals being business to business, and it felt to me like it was really a conversation about being human to human and that connection, which is quite unusual. So I think everyone's done a great job at kind of bringing a fresh approach today. Kath, Nikki, Rebecca and Matthew brought us points for further thinking as well, which I just wanted to dwell on. What is it like to move through a town that doesn't reflect you or says that you don't belong here? Really important, and I think everything that all of the speakers have talked about, you know, we're covering different user groups and different people, and it really has to reflect, and cities and towns should reflect everybody. We talked about third spaces, which Holly's just mentioned again, where you can be yourself, and places that help to end isolation but instead foster connection. And then another lovely one, we all have a need to belong. I think this is why we created Made for Me, was a need to belong. It came from one of our employees at Edge called Neve, and she will introduce herself in a moment in a video. And very simply, as a business owner, I asked her, can you come to this meeting with me in London? And I maybe very naively hadn't realised that actually for her that was a really big issue. She will explain why in the video, but it's, you know, that kind of taking for granted that everybody moves around spaces in cities and towns equally is not the case at all. And so if I just play the film, I think the point I wanted to make is, you know, from the idea of a kind of tiny acorn, we can create huge amounts of change together.
My name is Neve Brady. I'm disabled, neurodivergent and chronically ill, and I work as an urban designer at Edge Urban Design. Our team's idea for the New London Agenda is a toolkit for people like me, encompassed in an accessibility hub called a Made For Me hub. Made For Me hubs will take mobility, sensory and daily living aids and house them in pre-existing spaces, retrofitting them to become hubs, containing accessible toilets, water fountains, seating, quiet rooms and lockers to support people in their daily lives and their journeys across the city. London already hires out electric scooters and bikes, so why can't we hire out mobility, sensory and other aids, such as wheelchairs or noise-reducing headphones, in the same way from the same hubs? And will provide information on accessible places and routes in the local area. Once implemented, these Made For Me hubs will be an amazing way of making all cities much more accessible to everyone. Let's make our places made for me.
And a really interesting fact that came out when we were looking at this piece of research, talking to different user groups, is that disability is the only minority group that you can join overnight, and that's for anybody. So that could be getting older and becoming elderly, that could be breaking your leg and then finding it harder one day to walk around and move around. It could be having a pushchair, for example. And that is quite staggering that that could affect any of us. Yet we probably take for granted, I think very much so, that it's easy for all of us to move around our towns and cities. So we talked about rolling out the idea of hubs that can provide lots of different accessibility tools across a city. And I think the biggest thing that's come from this is it started as a conversation talking about people that were less able to move around, but actually it's become a much bigger conversation about how all of us have different needs. And Nikki and Matthew talked about what it means to be human, that it's okay to talk about how we feel, which I think was really great to hear this morning. And also they raised that often so many of us are so worried about being judged that we don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable, but I don't see that we can design our places for everybody if we are not willing to talk about that. So I hope this is the start of a conversation, and it feels like today there's a real collective energy for us all to collaborate and kind of keep that moving. So our panel have got some questions that they have posed to the audience. Maybe I'll bring the microphone and you can ask your own questions. Lucy, the first one is yours.
Is it working? Okay, my first question is, what's the most human quality our streets and public spaces are missing today?
Whilst everybody's thinking about it, what do you think?
Thanks for that. Places to linger, and I think it's been touched on so much today so far, in as that notion. Even yesterday morning, when I was helping to teach some of the students with Charlotte, which was such a fantastic program to engage with. And seeing just the differences and going to a place and really analysing it, but from their kind of perspective and with their kind of coming at it, with them rather than as an urban designer or an architect. And it's incredible just to think about how we talk about accessibility, but how inaccessible places are. Why would you even be there? How you always have to be able to spend money if you're going to loiter somewhere, and loiter is such a negative word, but really it's just being in a place for a period of time. I think it got touched on earlier about, no, Amanda said it. Amanda, there you are, hello. About the shopping malls. They're designed to keep people moving. They're designed to keep you spending. They don't want you hanging about. And I think that is turning that upside down, and why I was talking about neurodiversity, is approaching things less as just a series of boxes to tick, and to think actually as a species what is natural to us. So I've absolutely not answered your question, but also shade.
I think my favourite one I saw was crisscrossability. Whose was that? I can't even say the word. It was was that you, sir, in the front?
Me.
Great word.
Crisscrossability.
Lucy, another question from you.
Another question, sorry everybody. If we took the human condition seriously, as the starting point for urban design, what would look different in our cities 20 years from now? Nothing like a good start to the afternoon, you know. And we've said it in one, right? More toilets. And I think, I actually agree. I think cars are, my little slightly out there thought piece is that cars in 200 years' time will be looked at as we look at gun issues and things like that, and smoking, and that they'll be saying, why on earth were people doing that? And it will be in books, if there are books, and a lot of thought pieces. So I think the removal of the car from our lives would be an incredible change. But we would have to fundamentally change everything to do that now. So a bit of unpicking to do. There might be a switch on it, is that?
Hello, hello. Yes,
Oh, yeah.
perfect. Would anyone from the audience like to ask or answer this question, or ask Lucy a question? Yes.
Do you want me to run up with it?
I say, I will go.
Okay.
Would you like to say who you are and where you're from as well?
Well, this is just my idea. I'm from the Ipswich Society. My name is Mandy.
Nice to meet you, Mandy.
I live in Ipswich, and this might seem a bit counterintuitive for you, but with the car issue, I think we ought to provide neighbourhood car parks so that people don't park in the streets where we live, but they park nearby in a car park, which is for cars, and the streets are for people.
I think that's wonderful, and also you can keep away from cars on driveways, and we can re-green. Yeah. And I agree, centralised car parking hubs would be, and car clubs. We don't all need to own cars. We can share. Yeah. It's a.
Yeah, and just a little insight. Something that brought our communities together over this past 6 months. This is counterintuitive as well. We had major gasworks going on in our street, so the cars could not go up and down our street. But we had large holes in our street, and we all met as neighbours looking down these holes about what were they doing. And we were safe because there was no cars in the street. And it was like, it brought us together, the adversity of these holes.
It's incredible. I did the Vitality 10K on Sunday, and it was one of the most liberating things, was to be able to run down the middle of the street. And these were streets that never had cars. That, you know, this is ancient streets. Once upon a time, people were wandering down the middle of these streets. So I completely understand, like, what you mean. Yeah. And I think we all had a little bit of that kind of experience during lockdown, didn't we? We were all just kind of...
Wonderful.
We all lost our road awareness, didn't we? Yeah.
I just wanted to come in as well, because obviously there's a couple of models that support children. There's play streets where you can close the road for play, and then school streets. We've done a few in Suffolk where you close the road at school drop-off and pick-up time. But I think what's interesting about that, like you're saying, is with the play streets, people think, oh, it's just about the children, but actually you see one of the massive benefits for it is it's for everyone. Like, it brings the community together. The older people in the community are coming out having a cup of tea and meeting their neighbours. So just reducing that sort of dominance of the cars. Say if you've got two terrace streets, just, you know, the bit down the middle just brings people together from across the street too. So I love your idea of the community car parks, basically.
I just want to pick up on some ideas from the audience. There's a lot of play that's been going on. So kombucha dispensers and Dubai chocolate seem to be very popular for our future public realm. So there's another question.
Yeah.
My name's Stuart Turner. Picking up on Lucy's challenge, 20 years, she could have pushed it a bit further to 30 years or something like that, but anyway, I'll try and respond to it. I don't necessarily agree with you, Lucy, because I think we're still going to need some kind of movement at different scales. So there will be let's call them transit routes rather than roads. But what worries me is that I always see those sort of interventions as unproductive uses. So my question is, how do we make those productive uses, those pieces, those areas of land, and vast areas of land, if you think that what the land take with our roads is at the moment. So what I wanted to concentrate on was the idea of greening over these transit routes. And so it sounds probably preposterous at the moment, but a lot more green bridges, and I'll call them tree bridges. So we're greening over, we're winning back those sort of unproductive areas of land. So that would be my response.
Was there a question in that you wanted me to answer, or?
Yeah, we could develop it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think one of the things that I try to promote in what I do is to avoid parking directly onto plots of land that can in the future be converted to different uses. And MSCPs that have enough floor to floor to be able to convert them into other uses. So if you're going to do something today, because we have our needs today, to plan for tomorrow. And as you say, greenways, we're doing it in projects, particularly where, railways have fallen out of usage. They just turn into nothing. You can create wonderful active travel routes. Of course, when I say no cars, I don't mean no overall transportation. Actually, just lock everybody in their houses, and that's just the end of it. But of course, movement is absolutely important.
Hi, my name is Olcay. I'm from Place by Design. I'm an urban designer. Absolutely love the conversation about cars and what we can do, etc. But I really wonder, because we're all on the same board here, and just before I came here, I get frustrated with my own design and thought, I'm just doing, house, garage, house, garage, house, garage. Let's just get rid of the infrastructure. That will be win for the client. And then kind of cluster the cars in a way, just have a bit of creativity, a bit of innovation, and immediately I have a freaking out client calling me. What are you doing? Can we just please go back to normal ways? And so then I had to change the design again to put the private roads and all of it, how we design or force the design. So what are we missing here, how to get them on board? Because I think as designers, we're all on the same board, on the same page, but still forced to design in that sort of way. So the idea of putting the cars outside, we obviously know a lot of famous developments adopted that, and they're very successful, but we are still told that, there's no market for it, you can't sell the houses and all that. So, I don't know if you have an answer to that, but I feel like we need to focus on this, and I don't know, have some developers in this room as well. Don't know if there's any.
We're all afraid now. The developers are in the room. No, and I think we've got to have a strategy between us that we are working together. With developers. We are not enemies with developers. We have to understand as designers that they have their business requirements. There's a lot of risk involved in what they do. It can, the list goes on, and what we need to do is demonstrate to them the added value of what we're trying to do. There are a lot of legal frameworks, policies that can step in the way. They don't want to take the risk to reduce car parking, for example, because the local plan or whatever neighbourhood plan has said stipulates that you have to do this, and they want to just go through planning. They don't want to have a difficult time. They're spending a lot of money to do it, and it will continue on. So I absolutely agree with you. Getting more creative is absolutely only going to help our situation. But we've got to do it together with our clients, not battle with them, and hope that we get a client one day who says, let's go on this journey together, and we set a benchmark for others to be able to feel more comfortable. Do you have anything to add?
I am also going to change the question in a moment. Just there's a lot of chat going on here.
We'll change it. You can change it.
I'm going to change the question.
I just.
Neurodiversity and everything.
Yeah. What's happened? Somehow it's all about cars. I think, well, it's about creating choice, isn't it? So certainly in Suffolk, like Ipswich maybe being the exception, it's reasonable for residents, I would say, to want a car, to want a space for a car, because there aren't viable alternatives to get around. So I think we have to be mindful of that. And basically, we have to create choices. So within a new development, that's at least making sure we've got good walking, cycling infrastructure. We're trying to do some decent public transport infrastructure. So if people don't have an alternative, then we can't, like we said, we don't want them locked in their homes, but ultimately, that's what people will tell you in Suffolk. If they can't drive, they'll be locked in their homes. So we've got to kind of look at it from their point of view. And then I guess, outside of that, it's, working together, trying to grapple with all the viability stuff and things. But ultimately, if we can get residents saying, actually, we really want to cycle, or we really want to get on the bus or train, then hopefully that'll all help us all, won't it? So, yeah.
Marta, I think this was your question.
Well,
one.
it's all about the same, to be honest. Yeah. Which city would you like to live in 50 years now? To be honest, I think it's part of the conversation is, for me, is going back to the idea of public, of what is public meaning for everyone. So when we talk about cars, private cars, it's not for everyone. So maybe this is another thing. Well, and the other thing I wanted to, I went to Barcelona like 2 weeks ago, where they're doing it. I mean, there is room for improvement. I know sometimes it looks like we are trapped, but I mean, you can see it's the only thing is you cannot be the king. That's it. We need to negotiate here. There is a room for negotiation. That's the point.
Would anyone like to ask a question? Graham?
When a claim was just made that we want better cycling routes and better public transport, it made me realise that I live in Oxford and I can walk into town, that's very nice, but Oxfordshire highways won't speak to anybody, doesn't speak to anybody, is a hermetically sealed unit. And it wants everybody to be in cars because our road design guide demands everybody to be in cars, and therefore, mathematically, it means walking, cycling and and public transport are impossible. We can't have shops on corners because it might be dangerous. I mean, we're living in a situation where there's an evil collection of thinking amongst highway engineers, all in dereliction of their professional standards because they won't listen to any government advice, which is preventing urban design from good urban design from happening. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of one of my points really in my talk, was that obviously stereotypes exist for a reason. That's because they're often a reality too. So a lot of engineers a lot of people who work in highways are engineers, they're trained as engineers, so they're good at designing roads. I work in highways, I'm definitely not an engineer, do not get me to design a road, because you probably, I don't know, everyone would die or something, yeah. And I think this is the challenge we're up against. How do we shift that system? It's a historic thing. It probably goes back to restarting with education, how people are trained. I mean, the same goes for some sort of urban planning stuff and how planners are being trained. But, they start in education and then they come through, they've been taught how to design roads. That's what they do. We find it tough in Suffolk, partly through, well, because there's not that much choice, to be honest, in terms of who you use then to do the delivery and things. I imagine the same in Oxfordshire. I mean, and then the change, I guess, it's got to come bottom up to an extent through, like I said, education and skills, but also top down from politics and leadership to want to make that change in the first place. So, yeah, I would agree. But if we know that's the issue, hopefully we can start to think about how to solve it.
Good.
anyone.
Any engineers in the room? Going to go for another question. Marta, I think this was yours.
Yeah. What steps are you taking today that could help make that city a reality, that vision of the city that we have?
Just to make sure it's not SpongeBob SquarePants City. Or plates, cups. Would anyone like to just kind of make a pitch for their city or what they're doing to change things? We've got a lot of people in the audience who have got a lot of opinions but don't want to speak on the microphone. Any volunteers? Yeah. Oh.
Hello. It's just asking a bit of advice. So my local high street, it's got, you know, like a normal, like 2-lane traffic, one each way. I want to actually make it a one-way road, because you're going to need vehicle road, but the other road I want to green up, a bit like, you know, we've seen the images of, like, say, Paris, for example. I work in the industry. I'm not quite sure who's the first person I contact. Because it's not like it's a public highway. So in terms of, like, actually, do I like knock on the doors, get my neighbours involved, and draft up? So what is the first step that I will actually do to get that ball rolling? So that's a question to the audience.
Thank you. Maybe I guess councillors are a way in sometimes, or otherwise, it's either the councillors or the officers. So find the right councillor, obviously one that will support your cause, find the right officer. Not always the person you might think it is either. We often, you know, in local authorities, the people with the passion are sometimes hiding in a different team or department, but you need to find them to help you get in to make a difference. Depends if you're like what was just been described in Oxfordshire. It'd definitely be a bit of exploration to try and find the right person. Because anything that involves changing traffic movements is always a little bit controversial.
Some lovely comments, right. Got another one. Based on what you've heard today, how would you adapt your designs to make a place work better for children?
Hi, Claire Wilkes from LDA Design. I'm answering, I think you asked us to speak up from our cities. I'm going to put a word in for Bristol, which definitely has a lot of problems, but it is very gradually squeezing cars out of its city centre. And our office is in the middle of the city centre. It takes me 12 minutes on my bike to cycle there and 45 minutes to drive there now. And I think it's happening very gradually. What we've learnt is, so for example, on our street, where we were on King Street, we got together with all the businesses, 12 bars, and went to the City Council and said, could we get this pedestrianised? And it happened to be a very convenient, a very historic street, and they did, flat out in 2 weeks, in fact, so during COVID, and it stayed pedestrianised, have all the other old city streets. And so along with that and a whole lot of new cycle routes through the city, it's very gradually changing and still needs to a lot more. But I think a lot of it has been bottom up as well as top down.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess Bristol as well has been one of the home of the Play Streets movement really as well, isn't it? So yeah, some good things happening. I think in hindsight, maybe we didn't do enough during COVID because it was so easy to get things in really quickly then, and now it's a lot harder. Should have closed all the roads during COVID.
So I'm playing on the microphone. Can I speak? Shall I speak now? Hi, I'm going to do a bit of a shout out and try and join some dots, because I think many of the things you talked about, it's about joining the dots between things, which we spend a lot of time doing in the local authorities, I think, if we're lucky enough to have people who are enthusiastic enough, as you said, and in my world, have enough soft power to be able to, it's not always hard power that's required, it's often soft power, I think, in local authorities. I'm from Medway, down in Kent, without quite the budget of Bristol at the moment, but we're trying hard. I think a lot of these issues are about, we observe the paradigm shift in childhood that's taken place over the last 30 years. On maps, obviously onto technology a lot, and as a result, one of the things we see a lot in Medway is that the virtual world affects actual behaviour in space, affects the analogue world now very, very considerably. We have an initiative called Child Centre Medway in our world that tries to tackle many of the things you're talking about, I think, through events and so on. And we have a design team, of which I'm a part, which understands the conversation, is trying to join the dots between highways, the analogue world, the digital world, and the corporate world of development, really, and value, as a couple of people have said. And it's a very tricky mix, obviously, as we know. But I think someone asked a bit earlier about how do you start to go about it? And I think what we found absolutely is soft power is incredibly helpful in this area, because I think one of you mentioned you need to demonstrate it really and let people see it first. And so we're finding with the younger population that we do a lot of work with and surveys with and so on, that really play on the way is something very different to it used to be. The use of analogue space, the movement is very different to it used to be, and so somehow we have to innovate with these, with all the moving parts. I can't say we got it right yet or have an answer for it, but but it's kind of an exciting time I think, because there are opportunities to do some extraordinary things actually if we can have the energy and the will to get it right.
Yeah, thank you. And I think in terms of children using their neighbourhoods and their outdoor environments, we just need to be careful that often we blame technology and mobile phones and screen use for children not going outside, but actually if you ask children, they want to go outside, they want to play with their friends. If the environment's there, they will use that. They might be on a screen some of the time as well, but they will go out and use it. I think we can't use that as an excuse for why they're not using the spaces. It's just we haven't designed them as such. And I think the play on the way is really interesting too, because also, children are quite creative. I suppose things that, like one of my boys scoots to school, he goes along what's not a very inclusive pavement, I guess. It's like really rickety and bumpy, but he loves it because he can jump over those bits. So I think, children can be creative, and sometimes we've been a little bit risk averse as well in how we design things.
Yeah, we can be a bit over-designed with children's play, and I think children like nothing more than just to be given the freedom to do what they want with whatever they find. I find my child has, my 8-year-old daughter has endless toys, plastic this and whatever, like, you name it, she's got it. But actually her favourite thing to do is just to find things and just frankly make a mess out of any room she gets her hands on, and just to make her world around her. And I think we've got a lot to learn about just letting kids have the space to do that.
Oh gosh, that's so loud. My kind of thoughts on, I guess, child-friendly design approaches come from trying to kind of think back to when I was a child, but also, how to summarise this? We were all children once, and I think it's important to kind of take into account that some of us never really stopped being children. A lot of my interest in general, not just in the workplace as an urban designer, is that I really think people want to have fun, and I think that today's survey in the background is never a better example, because everybody's maybe taking it with a light heart and having a bit of fun and having a giggle whilst we also discuss some really fundamentally important topics. I think if you start to think about how all people can benefit from enjoying their spaces, children will likely benefit as well. Because if you think about children in isolation, even if the environments are safer, even if we completely eliminated cars, you know, I remember my dad used to complain about the Voi scooters in my local town being a huge threat, because he walked more slowly and people would scoot at 15, 20 miles an hour, and he saw that as dangerous, even more so than cars. And that's kind of an active travel, I suppose. So yeah, I guess like, I feel like dangerous environments maybe aren't necessarily the problem, but it's the fact that environments are so stale and boring that even adults don't want to spend long times in them, so why would children? So that would be my suggestion, to think about how all people can have fun.
I really agree. Sorry, I'll give it to you in a second, Holly. I think that's what my little talk was about, in terms of, I placed it around neurodiversity, but actually we need to scoop up everybody in this, and it's not about prescribing to specific groups of people, because actually if you get it right for the elderly, and you make everything everything accessible and people can move around really well, everybody benefits from that. And as Hannah said, you know, you can become disabled in one way or another overnight. And I think us taking the strategy to want to not just pay your dues and just do what you got to do to improve things and see things, but actually fundamentally look at it as who are the most vulnerable, and that's where your starting point is, not making specific exceptions here and there.
If we could have one final point from all of you, that would be great, because we've got another tea and coffee break coming up next.
Yeah, just a quick one. Picking up your comment, I think this is a fantastic idea. I mean, it's a fundamental idea. If what we need is a cultural change, it has to be sexy, it has to be fun, it has to be like better than what we have. Cycling is fun. You're happier if you go to work cycling that in the in the metro. So. Yeah, I don't know how to do it, but we need to engage with this in our proposals for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the reasons I've kind of got into all of this is because I'm really passionate about people being physically active and moving in their daily lives. So I saw one of the suggestions was turn all bus stops into climbing frames, which links to what you're saying. I think climbing frames, maybe a pull-up bar or a bit of an outdoor gym, you know, like, certainly unfortunately, a lot of the bus stops in rural areas are just a little signpost, if that, and they're not making you want to use the bus, and they're not making it fun either. So yeah, absolutely, like, we need to try and maybe get out of some of our technical design things sometimes and just think a bit more creatively and a bit more aspirationally about what we actually want to see.
Are we ending it there?
Yes. Just a big thank you to the three of you, to Lucy, Holly and Marta. Thanks for fielding all those questions. And there's another break now for tea and coffee and biscuits and some networking, and we start again at 3:15.